In the ancient days, you were brought to a teacher, and you had a specific teacher and a tutor. And that's probably if you were pretty much only of a noble class. So like Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle. That's a very well-known fact of history. That's because he happened to be the son of the Emperor of Macedonia, who could afford to pay the smartest man in the entire known world to tutor his son for him. But, so, in the Greek tradition, which sort of winds up getting melded with the Jewish tradition later on around our Lord's time, there's this sort of, you want to learn from the specific teacher, or you belong to the specific school of thought. Now, everybody likes to talk about the great Greek thinkers and the great the Greek philosophers, but at the time, philosophy was just considered, you just think about things and you talk about how things work. So, for example, Aristotle's Politics and Nicomachean Ethics are his two most popular works. They're his two most popular books, which he didn't actually write, but were compiled around the time of his death, or after his death, by his students. But he also had works on physics, on aesthetics. Basically, the idea of philosophy was that we just study what's around us. So education, back then, was just, we go and we learn from the philosophers. And you just belong to whatever school of philosophers. You got the Epicureans over there, and you've got, Diogenes sitting naked in a barrel over there, founding the Stoics. He's the most fun to talk about. And then you've got Aristotle.
Be one character.
Yeah. And then you've got the Pythagoreans, who were actually not just mathematicians, but they were also philosophers. They thought about things like, like the nature of the world, and like eschatology and all that sort of thing. So,
if I can interject real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said that they studied what was around them, and that meant studying the philosophers. Was it just the philosophers, or was it also other different parts of society, whether that be business or politics or farming and agriculture? Like, what did education mean to them in that sense?
Well, if you were a farmer, you taught your son how to farm. If you were a blacksmith, you taught your son blacksmithing. Basically, if you're a father, you teach your son whatever it is you do.
So with those pursuing education in the sense that we're talking about it, did they strictly focus on philosophy? Were they siloed in with their teachers? Or did they kind of take a more liberal arts approach to everything?
So that was more those that were either, one, descended from nobility, two, had connections to the world of the philosophers, or three, showed a particular intuition or particular kind of sense of being able to think about the world in the same way as the philosophers did. So we didn't really have, people laying in bed going, hey, I want to be a philosopher when I grow up. It's more, as you develop, you sort of learn what is good about you. And you may be learning to farm. You may also know a trade, because philosophy isn't just going to put food on the table. Socrates had a trade. He was an artisan of some kind. I'm sure somebody in the comments will let me know what exactly it was. I've forgotten it at this point. Okay. And it would be rather impolite of me to look it up in the middle of filming. So,
well, you could if you wish. But so it was somewhere in between. Like, you weren't learning everything, obviously, but philosophy did seem to be above everything else.
It's considered high because of the nature of what it is that you're thinking about. Who are we as a race? What is our purpose? What is the point of humanity on Earth? And what might that be in relationship to whatever deity our particular society believes in? And the Jewish tradition is kind of similar to that, although the Jews are a lot better organized, so it's not just, hey, I'm going to go and find this particular philosopher that I like. I'm going to get taken to the temple, and when I'm at the temple, then the priests are going to educate me there. So the education is all done by the priests, and the scribes and the Pharisees, and all those people. Like St. Paul was a Pharisee.
Mhm.
He was educated in the Pharisaical tradition and educated by scribes. Again, I forget the name of his particular teacher, but he was very well known teacher in the Jewish and Greek traditions. So if we fast forward a little bit farther, when by the way, this is also the kind of tradition that St. Augustine would have been taught. Although he learned, it starts to get a little bit more separated at that point. It was already kind of separated, and we had this in the old Greek traditions, but in the Roman tradition that St. Augustine was taught in, so he is taught philosophy, and he's also taught rhetoric at one point. But rhetoric is being an orator is a trade. So that is something that you start kind of as an apprentice, and you learn from somebody in particular. So
Okay.
he's taught basically philosophy, he's taught logic, he's taught rhetoric. And he would have understood some of the sciences because that was just how philosophy was done back then. It was like we just learn everything that there is to learn about,
Mhm.
as far as how the world works and how everything is. And then later on, we all know St. Augustine became probably one of the most brilliant theologians that the church has ever seen.
This is
That's a
true.
reason he's a doctor of the church. After a while, there's, at the height of the Roman Empire, and then there's the barbarians invade, and that's just after St. Augustine's time. And then everything kind of becomes a mess. And at this point, if you wanted your son to learn something, you would have sent him to the monks because, you've decided to give yourself to God and you've locked yourself in a cave for your entire life, but you do need something to do. So a lot of the monks become they're philosophers, they're doctors, they're scientists, they're all sorts of things.
Okay.
But they have a high intellectual tradition and practice, particularly with the Benedictines and the Augustinians, the two earliest orders that we currently have. So at that point, when those orders get spread out and other orders are founded, sort of in what are actually the Dark Ages, which is between the fall of the Roman Empire and the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire, that's basically how you are educated.
You find a
Otherwise,
monastery.
otherwise, the rest of we're too busy trying to survive and not be killed by Huns and Vandals and Mongols and whoever else happens to be invading, to
Okay.
focus on something like education is important, but survival is more important.
All
So
right.
then Charlemagne comes along and establishes the Holy Roman Empire. And over the course of the time of the Holy Roman Empire, because he starts to bring back older education models, and there's sort of there's an explosion, sort of a renaissance before the Renaissance during the time of the Holy Roman Empire.
Okay.
There's this sort of explosion of education. And Christmas Day of the year 800, when Charlemagne is crowned king, crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Saint Leo the Great, is the most widely accepted date for the start of the Middle Ages, of the medieval period.
Okay.
Some people say that, the really early medieval period is when Constantine became emperor.
That seems really far back.
It's when a lot of that is tied with Christianity. So the medieval era is intrinsically tied with the spread of Christianity and the practice of Christianity all throughout Europe.
Okay.
So people say that's like pre-medieval, from Constantine up until Charlemagne, but it's also like almost a 500-year era. So at that point,
When Charlemagne is bringing back education models from the past, which ones is he bringing back? Is he going more teacher-centric, philosophy-centric?
so Charlemagne really likes the way that the Romans did a lot of things, at least practically speaking. So he brings a lot of those things back, and it was a height of intellectual prowess and intellectual ability in the time of the Romans.
Okay.
He really likes a lot of their architecture, so he starts bringing some of that back too. But ultimately, what is born, and it's sort of slowly developing throughout the Middle Ages, but ultimately what is born is the what's known as the trivium and the quadrivium. Okay? So the trivium is sort of where you start when you first start in education, and this actually isn't until around what we today would consider late middle school to early junior high.
So you start that late?
With higher education, this is what's considered higher education. Your first level is with the trivium. And, when the church is running education at this time, everybody has to learn catechism first. And the trivium and the quadrivium and the trivium influences that as well. But it's most effective when it's introduced a little bit later, because the trivium is 3 sections. There's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So logic and rhetoric, the 2 things that St. Augustine was first taught, or at least what he developed into.
So thinking and how to articulate said thinking was
Yes.
highest in their minds.
So, and then once you get through the trivium, then there's the quadrivium, and the trivium doesn't go away, but the quadrivium just sort of gets added into it. And the quadrivium, meaning 4 subjects, is geometry, astronomy, music, and arithmetic. Arithmetic being all forms of mathematics and all forms of mathematical science. So, with the exception of geometry, because the study of shapes and space was considered separate from mathematics, which is more of a logical practice as opposed to a practical practice.
And within that, there seems to be an orientation towards, okay, first we're going to teach you to think and how to think. And then next, we're going to teach you what to think about. And that stuff that we're going to teach you to think about is, you could say it is what is good and true and beautiful. It's the basics of how to look at the world, what the world is made of, and the mind behind it, right?
Yes. And this is the model that Thomas Aquinas was brought up in. And he actually helped to further it and develop it into even more of a concrete thing. But that's basically how Thomas Aquinas was educated.
Okay.
So once you get through the trivium and the quadrivium, then you also are basically, you're set up for the university, which is another foundation of our wonderful and great Catholic Church. The university system, the University of Paris, I believe, is the oldest one. Either Paris or Bologna.
Okay.
Basically, that is to then take education a step further, where you can really be specialized. And this is for the people that are really particular and really special, because education as a whole was kind of for everybody and more primarily for the wealthier and more noble classes.
Okay.
The trivium and the quadrivium are sort of the Thomas Aquinas method. And that actually lasts in education basically until the Enlightenment, or not too far after that.